Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Major updates today on the emerging rivalry between Lando Norris and Max Verstappen that is going to continue, you'd imagine, this weekend of the British Grand Prix. It all kicked off last time out in Austria, but Lando Norris now backtracking from the demand that he made on the apology for Max Verstappen after what happened last weekend, but Lewis Hamilton wading into the discussion as well. Lando effectively said, look, what Andrea Stella said about the fights that Hamilton and Verstappen had back in 2021 contributing to today, Hamilton might agree with. Hamilton, though, actually defends Verstappen on this one in a rather interesting way. Very much interested to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. First of all, the confirmation is in. Oliver Bearman will be driving the Haas for next season. We've pretty much known this is going to be true now for some time. They were just, I guess, waiting for the British Grand Prix to actually make the confirmation. This is interesting news for multiple reasons. He was in the car, of course, the Ferrari car at the start of the season in Jeddah, replacing Carlos Sainz. Did a stellar job. Everybody knows that. P11 in qualifying, P7 in the race. Jumped in on qualifying day with one practice session because he, of course, Sainz raced the Friday and then had the appendicitis operation. So, Bearman did a stellar job there. But his Formula 2 campaign last season was very impressive as a rookie. This year, Prema are all at sea, and even his highly anticipated teammate Andrea Antonelli, who's probably going to drive next year's Mercedes, is also kind of floundering in the series. So I think it goes to show that Haas, sure, F2 has maybe made some question marks, but every time Bearman has stepped in a Haas car for an FP1 session or whatever, he has impressed the team massively. It's the same when he's tested the Ferraris or even driven the Ferraris. And I feel like other teams will also take a similar approach of, okay, look, Bearman stepped in to that Ferrari at Jeddah, did a stellar job. These guys are maybe more prepared than people are going to give them credit for. And so confirmation today. Now, I did say at the start of the season several months ago, if I was Bearman, do I necessarily want to be going to Haas just because it seemed like a team at the time and Gunter Steiner there, and given that we weren't expecting their car to be very good, a pretty scary team to potentially join as a rookie in the team. You could potentially get chewed up and spat at right as a result. Now, that does not seem to be the case nowadays. Clearly, Haas have made mega progress over the last few months. Their close ties to Ferrari are certainly helping them, it seems, make serious steps, and Ferrari generally are on a good trajectory as well, and they just scored double points last weekend in Austria with more upgrades to come here in Silverstone. So actually, that Haas seat that Ollie Bearman is now going to have is actually a really rather attractive seat on the grid that many other drivers would love to have, and that Bearman is going to get the chance to do exactly that. These, by the way, the legs at the top of the screen were actually the legs of his father, so it was cool to see them having a moment here. And I think the number that Ollie's going to race under is going to be 87, which is, I think, his father's racing number based on the birthdays of Ollie and his brother and stuff like that. So pretty cool stuff to see really from the pair of them, and obviously proud moment for everyone involved. He will become, by the way, the youngest driver to ever drive for Haas. So 19 years and 10 months of age he'll be at the Australian Grand Prix in 2025, younger than Mazepin, younger than Mick Schumacher, younger than everyone else that has driven for Haas in the recent past. Lewis Hamilton, by the way, was asked to comment on this situation actually, given the fact that he is going to be at Ferrari for next year and is therefore going to be part of that whole Ferrari driver academy system of which Ollie Bearman is going to be part. And he was asked, look, are you going to take Ollie under your wing? What is that going to look like? And Hamilton says, no, but as one of the older drivers, my door is always open if anyone needs advice, he says. So he's like, look, I've got my own things to focus on, says Hamilton. I imagine is kind of what he's getting at here, because there's a fair few things that he's got to think about for next season, absolutely, in addition to trying to get a driver that doesn't even drive for his team into the future. But I do think for Bearman, what makes Haas a very attractive prospect is that Hamilton will be at Ferrari for 2-3 years, something along those lines. You would think he's going to do 25, 26, possibly 27, try and get the 8th. If it doesn't happen, he might call it a day at that point. At which point Ollie Bearman, if he has proven at Haas to be a valuable asset, may well be the man that they look at Ferrari to get called up to the main team alongside. Presumably it would still be Charles Leclerc at that point, if things go as we might expect them to over the next couple of seasons. This interesting though from Bearman as well. He mentions how in 2015, 2016, Hamilton sent him a video saying, let's keep pushing. Hopefully you can make it to F1 one day. So thought that was a nice little piece to see. And speaking really of the rookies in general, the fact that the teams are giving them more of a go nowadays, I think they're seeing what Bearman's done. They're seeing that, sure, Formula 2 might not be the best feeder series in terms of preparing the drivers, but just everything the drivers do nowadays, the F4s, the F3s, the Freckers, all the championships they drive, single-seater racing from a very early age nowadays, these guys are well prepared. Even if they're young, they are pretty well prepared. They don't have the unlimited testing they're used to, but in the tests with Haas, clearly Bearman massively impressed, and the F2 campaign of this season won't be that big of a deal as a result of it. And therefore, you've got guys like Hadjar in the Red Bull Academy, they're looking at him, so he's going to be in the car instead of Checo Perez this upcoming weekends. So see how he gets on, of course. There's other names in that RBR Academy that they're looking at. And of course, this is one of the reasons why Daniel Ricciardo will be somewhat concerned about his future, because RB, VCARB, they are looking to put Liam Lawson in their car. And there's other names like Hadjar, which are in consideration potentially as well at some point. These were some interesting words as well from Toto Wolff today on Fernando Alonso, because it was rumoured at the start of the season when Hamilton left what they were going to do, Mercedes. Were they going to get Alonso? Were they going to try and get Max Verstappen? That became an option. Obviously, Carlos Sainz became an option. Andrea Antonelli is probably the number one. But Alonso, we believe, potentially had the chance here. And actually, Toto says, at the beginning of the year, we considered Alonso. But at that time, Fernando was not interested in driving for Mercedes. And to be fair, at the time, this was not an unreasonable conclusion for Alonso to draw. Mercedes were regressing. They didn't seem to understand their car. Aston Martin, sure, they weren't in a great spot, but still there was progress and potential of the future. But nowadays, does Mercedes seem the more attractive prospect? Probably yes. They're doing better at the moment. They're probably going to do better next year. But 2026 is what matters for Alonso, and, you know, there's a lot of reason to believe that Aston Martin could also be successful. They brought on Cowell, who was former top guy at Mercedes, leading their engine project, to lead Aston Martin's Honda project for 2026 and beyond. They've got their new factory. They're bringing on the likes of Enrico Cardile from Ferrari, potentially Adrian Newey. So there's a few reasons to believe that they could be a really competitive force. But as Wolff goes on to say, to kind of turn the dagger, as it were, to like turn the knife, twist the knife, Fernando would have had many more titles if he had managed his career differently, he says. So basically he's saying, look, Fernando, you could have come here and it would have been a better decision for you. And hey, Max, you're hearing this? Like, maybe this is the place for you to be. Speaking of Max, though, upgrades this weekend. We're not sure what McLaren are bringing, if anything at all. There have been some rumours they might bring something, but potentially not. Mercedes are going to bring upgrades this upcoming weekends, but Red Bull will have a significant step this weekend. That is the rumour as of today. That would include a floor, a new diffuser, and potentially some other components as well. Now, it has been, it's got to be said, earlier this season, they did bring other upgrades, Red Bull, that didn't necessarily perform exactly as they expected or hoped them to. So, if the Red Bull upgrades work, probably Max will just stroll off into the distance and win without too much challenge. But it is Silverstone. It is going to be the home crowds. They are going to want Lando, of course, in the most competitive other car than a Red Bull in the McLaren to be right up there. Of course, Hamilton, Russell in the Mercedes, which is looking reasonably competitive. And even Albon, to some extent, I'm sure, in the Williams will get some good support as well. But Ferrari are in an interesting spot because not sure they're bringing upgrades this weekend. They may bring some small parts, but probably nothing major like Red Bull are apparently bringing. And even Norris says that he's expecting 3 of the cars to fight for victory at Silverstone, i.e., he's, Ferrari not included, right? The team that won the most recent race, Mercedes, and himself in the McLaren, and of course Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. So there's a feeling that Ferrari, going from being the most competitive challenger to Max not long ago, are now almost getting removed from the conversation. So that is a bit of concern for, of course, the Scuderia. But let's talk once again about this big incident, because this dominated the headlines this past week. The Lando Norris, Max Verstappen collision, of course, that occurred at turn 3, where they were battling hard at the Austrian Grand Prix, and eventually neither of them won the race after they crashed out basically together, and eventually Verstappen got back in the race, finished 5th, and extended his championship lead on Lando Norris. The big discussion, of course, was about the incident itself. How far over the line was Max? What was the reaction going to be to it from the other drivers, from Lando himself? And of course, there was a real tirade after the race from Lando on the way that Verstappen drove, saying it was absolutely over the line. He demanded an apology from Max as a result of this whole thing if he was not going to lose respect for him. To me, this one, okay, sure, Max pulls over to the left-hand side, squeezes Lando under braking. Lando has no obligation to move here, and look, Max is at fault, so they gave him a penalty as a result. To me, the big one, though, that was probably lesser talked about was actually this one, which is pretty much the first time they almost came together, where Lando goes for a dive bomb down the inside. And I feel like Max's comments on dive bombing were kind of strange to me during the race, because like Max has kind of made this his modus operandi, sometimes going for these, late lunges, these dive bombs. And this, as far as I'm concerned, is a very legitimate overtaking tactic. We love the Daniel Ricciardo dive bombs, all this stuff in years gone by. And in a non-DRS world, this is how you've got to get the moves done, to be honest, a lot of the time. So, ideally we're going to get back into a non-DRS world of Formula 1 at some point where it's no longer required. So Lando goes for this move, and then Max absolutely responds by jigging to the inside, cuts off the line, and honestly I think both were very lucky. Certainly Max was lucky, I think, not to get rear-ended here by Lando, who manages to just about avoid the contact, kind of a Ricciardo Verstappen Baku-esque from a few years ago. And this was the one where Lando was on the radio saying, hey guys, like, he just reacted to my move, you're not allowed to do that. And look, this maybe wasn't a slam dunk pen for Max, but I think the stewards should have at least said, given the fact that in the rules, you can't move under braking. This one especially was, I think, very clear over the line, but the stewards did nothing about it. They, didn't have to penalise Max initially, but they could have said, hey, like, warning or something for erratic driving. I don't know. Like, instead of the stewards sitting there eating popcorn, watching the fight unfold, I think the fact that they don't tend to say anything, that is the problem that many people have looked at, is to say, look, the stewards end up allowing this type of stuff by not being as proactive as they might have otherwise been. But after the race, of course, the Red Bull guys were coming to the defence of Verstappen, and Christian Horner basically said, Lando was trying to start something, and Andrea Stella actually commented on this and said, I think that kind of statement from Horner is pretty irreceivable, I would say, and to some extent I think it speaks for the integrity of the person that said that. So quite strong words there again from Stella, as you may well expect. But what do the drivers have to say about it, right? Because George Russell says, look, Max is going to push the rules to the limits, as all the drivers do, as all the top drivers do. And I think this is, like, Max does drive in a different way in terms of defending, in terms of being hard to beat. We've seen that for years in the past. But to be fair, Max will drive whatever the rules are going to allow him to drive. And even if they change the rules for Max to stop him moving under braking, if he's still going to do it and they're not going to mention it, they're not going to penalise him, then, does the rule even exist if it's not enforced? And, look, at the end of the day, my opinion is, don't hate the player, hate the game. Like, if the rules are what they are and Max is going to do whatever he can within those set of rules to try and take advantage of it, then someone driving like Max is simply a byproduct of the situation here. Ricciardo commented and says, yeah, just good racing. They've kind of blown it up because it's the whole friends to enemies thing, which, I think there might be some truth to that, but at the same time, the whole friends to enemies thing is not a null and void storyline. Yes, this is basically time one of this occurring on a big stage here in Austria, but the next time it occurs, the next Grand Prix it occurs at, as it may do this weekend, over time, if this continues, if the fighting continues, then it will start to take a toll. And it's probably expected that after this incident, they're going to calm it down a little bit. And as Max says, look, been receiving criticism over the last few days. I don't care about that. I go home, I live my life. The only thing I care for is my relationship with Lando. So kind of nice to say, and it seems like they've made up to some degree. They agree 99% apparently on what happened in Austria. Next race, they're going to go at it flat out. That's what we agreed to, he says. So exciting stuff, I suppose, and hopefully they'll continue to do that and continue to create more battles. And I'm sure George Russell, Lewis Hamilton, whoever, will be happy about that possibility as well. But Lando said, look, I wouldn't have done anything differently, wouldn't have changed the way that I raced, and then says, look, Max has a different way of racing, which he is now discovering firsthand. I don't think he needed to apologise. I was just frustrated at the time. So Lando backing down from the comments he made on saying, Max, you've got to apologise, going to lose respect for you and all this. And Max is probably saying, look, did what I did because I can get away with it, right? It's in the rules. So, this is how I'm going to race. And obviously there's going to be 1% disagreement there, but it seems like Lando's kind of on board to say, okay, whatever, let's just go to the next Grand Prix. And as he says, pathetic incident, good racing to me, and I overreacted. So certainly a backtrack there from Lando on the situation, and says that he doesn't need to apologise. Very interesting piece, though, was on the Lewis Hamilton side, right? Because actually he went on to say, Lando, on Andrea Stella's comments. As Stella said after the race, of course, team principal of McLaren, that this is happening because of what happened in 2021. Max was over the line multiple times in the fight with Lewis Hamilton back in 2021, and after that season, they did not penalise Verstappen's driving standards as much as potentially they could have done, and as a result of that, it's carried over to today. And this comment was, echoed by many others. There was discussion on whether it was fair, whether it was unfair, and Lando seemingly agrees with it and says, look, I'm sure Lewis would agree with that 2 or 3 years ago, 100%. So Lewis was asked to comment on this, and then he said, look, nothing to do with me, the Max and Lando collision. I want to stay out of the whole thing. But he was asked to comment specifically on that, and he said this, I don't agree with that, no. And then he was asked to elaborate, and then he says, yeah, I just don't agree with it. So he didn't really want to say too much. But he doesn't think, and maybe didn't want to go into too much detail here, but he doesn't think Hamilton, that the Hamilton-Verstappen fights from 2021, the way that they were dealt with, has actually basically had any impact on today. So whether that's defending Verstappen's driving standards, although I don't really think Hamilton was too happy with the way that Max was driving back then, or what he's saying saying is, like, it doesn't matter what the stewards say, Max is going to drive like this anyway. So, yeah, I guess you can look at it one of two ways, but very much interested to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Just one final thing I thought was kind of interesting here is that going into this Grand Prix, Red Bull really needs Sergio Perez to actually do something, because their average grid placings over the last 5 Grand Prix have been 2.4 for Verstappen. The RB is about the same, 10, 11, but Red Bull is literally 10 points on average, like exactly 10 behind where Max is, which is actually quite impressive. So very much interested to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.